Picture this. Berlin, November 1923. You are standing in line at a bakery. The price board says 200 billion marks for a loaf of bread, not million, billion. The woman ahead of you pulls a wheelbarrow full of cash to pay for milk. 12 minutes later, when you reach the counter, the baker crosses out the price. Now it is 250 billion. The mark has lost 1/3 of its value while you stood in line. This is not fiction. This happened. And it is happening again. Country after country, currency after currency. So the real question is, what actually survives? Economic collapse does not arrive with explosions. It arrives in stages, and history has shown us the blueprint, repeated in country after country. It begins with stage 1. A government spends more than it collects. Deficits grow, promises pile up, debts balloon. Stage 2 follows. The central bank prints money to cover the shortfall. Politicians avoid the pain of cuts or reforms by diluting the currency instead. Then comes stage 3. Purchasing power evaporates. Prices rise quietly at first, then violently. Inflation becomes uncontainable. Trust begins to break. Stage 4. People flee. Not physically, financially. They switch to anything that holds value better than money with a broken engine. Goods, dollars, land, metal, anything but what is being printed faster than it can be counted. Stage 5. Collapse. Not of the country, not of the people, but of the currency. This pattern played out in Weimar Germany, where the mark fell from 320 per dollar to 4.2 trillion per dollar in just 18 months. The paper did not matter anymore. No one cared how many marks you had. They only cared how much bread it could still buy. In Venezuela, the bolivar collapsed from 10 per dollar to over 1 million per dollar in a single decade. Citizens walked past banknotes blowing on the ground. In Lebanon, the pound lost 98% of its value between 2019 and 2023. Doctors became poor overnight, not because their skills stopped mattering, but because their savings did. Different continents, different politics, same pattern, same sequence, same outcome. And in every case, as currencies failed, some things held value and some things went to zero. Recognizing the pattern early became the difference between loss and survival. When faith in paper disappears, people turn to what governments cannot print. Precious metals, gold and silver, have survived every documented currency collapse for a simple reason. They exist outside the system. During the collapse of Weimar Germany, cash was worthless. The mark lost virtually all value. But 1 ounce of gold still bought the same goods before, during, and after the crisis. The currency failed, gold did not move. In Zimbabwe, people carried $100 trillion notes to buy a bus ticket. Those with gold, even in small quantities, retained access to goods and markets. In Venezuela, while bolivars became dead paper, physical gold remained tradable. Citizens melted jewelry to barter for food and medicine, not because it was special, but because it was not currency. Even today, we see echoes. In Turkey, when inflation surged in 2024, gold deposit accounts more than doubled in value within 3 months, from 1.36 trillion lira to 2.72 trillion. Citizens were not speculating, they were escaping. Critics of gold often miss the point. They say it does not earn interest, but that is not the job of gold. Gold is insurance, not investment. When governments inflate their way out of debt and central banks flood systems with liquidity, gold becomes valuable by default. Its supply cannot be arbitrarily expanded. That scarcity protects purchasing power. Even during the 2008 U.S. financial crisis, gold initially fell during the liquidity panic. But once the dust settled, it climbed 166% in 3 years. Silver spiked even harder, up 448%. In the 1970s, during stagflation, gold surged more than 440%, following a mid-decade bottom. It is not speculation, it is pattern recognition. And in every collapse, gold did its single job: preserve value when paper could not. When your own currency is failing, the fastest way to survive is to hold someone else's. Throughout modern history, access to stable foreign currency has served as a lifeline for those trapped in local monetary collapse. The reason is simple: it functions. When your money no longer buys what you need, another nation's currency often still can. In Lebanon, bank accounts denominated in Lebanese pounds held their face value, but lost over 98% of their purchasing power between 2019 and 2023. A nurse who had saved the equivalent of $50,000 saw it reduced to $1,000 in real terms. But another nurse, working the same shifts, had her savings stored in US dollar cash, outside the system. Her wealth was untouched, entirely intact. In Zimbabwe, supermarkets began pricing goods informally in dollars before it became legal. The population shifted to dollars naturally, long before the currency was officially recognized. It was not policy, it was survival behavior. Country after country has followed the same route. Ecuador dollarized in 2000, El Salvador in 2001. Panama has used US currency since 1904. In Cambodia, ATMs dispense US dollars instead of the national currency. In Venezuela, large purchases are made in US dollars today, even as the bolivar remains technically legal tender. People do not wait for governments to act, they protect themselves. They move wealth into whatever stores value. And while US dollars are most common, the same logic applies to Swiss francs, euros, or British pounds, any relatively stable fiat in comparison to a collapsing one. Foreign currency is not glamorous. It does not beat inflation long term. But in collapse, it buys time. And sometimes, time is the most valuable thing you own. It may sound contradictory, but in more than one collapse, stocks have soared, even while the real economy burned. In Venezuela, during the peak of its crisis in 2024, the stock market rose over 3,400%. In January 2026 alone, the Caracas Stock Exchange surged from 2,000 points to over 6,000 in just 9 trading days. Some individual equities jumped more than 200% in days. Why? Because a stock is not cash. It is ownership in a real business with land, inventory, factories, and assets that still function no matter what the fiat currency is doing. When the local currency collapses, the nominal price of stocks rises rapidly, not because the companies are becoming more valuable, but because it takes more worthless money to reflect the same underlying value. But here is the catch: not all stocks survive. Only those tied to productive companies, especially ones that generate foreign revenue, truly preserve wealth. For example, a company exporting agricultural goods or tech parts receives income in dollars, euros, or other hard currencies, even if its stock is priced locally. During Mexico's 1994 peso crisis and Asia's 1998 crash, companies that could shift sales to international markets held far more value than those locked in to domestic demand. A bakery selling only in collapsing currency may still post profits but cannot convert them into anything useful. A factory exporting to Europe? That business becomes stronger relative to local decline. So, while people focused on where to put their cash, some who held shares of export-capable companies passed through the storm not only with protection, but with growth. Productive equities are not a collapse hedge for everyone, but for those holding the right ones with the right positioning in the right regions, they did not just survive, they benefited. When currency systems fail entirely, societies do not stop trading. They just change what they trade with. In the ashes of collapse, barter becomes the new economy, and consumables become currency. After World War II in Germany, the Reichsmark was worthless. People traded food, coal, potatoes, but the most widely accepted form of money was cigarettes. American soldiers could buy them from military supply centers and barter with German civilians for nearly anything: milk, transport, clothing, even medical care. Why cigarettes? They were uniform, light, durable, non-perishable and widely desired, the perfect temporary currency in a system with no trust. The same thing happened in Venezuela decades later. As the bolivar crashed in value, people exchanged fish for flour, soak for vegetables, gasoline for rice. Paper bills had value only as scrap. Real value came in objects that solved a problem directly. Medical supplies, antibiotics, toothpaste, feminine products, batteries, lighter fluid, toilet paper, bleach. All of these became economic tools, not goods, but functional units of exchange. Even basic tools like flashlights, duct tape, sewing kits carried more weight in the market than official currency. But there is a limitation. Consumables can be used once and then they are gone. You cannot store medical kits as generational wealth. You cannot rely on soap to preserve your legacy. However, in the acute phase of a crisis, when money freezes, supply chains collapse, and trust disappears, having the right tactically useful resources can cover the gap between systems. In a working system, you trade stocks. In a broken one, you trade soap. You do not need a garage full, but you need enough to survive the blackout. And in those moments, a jar of antibiotics may buy more than a gold coin ever will. History shows that when systems collapse, land that produces food survives better than almost anything else. During the Great Depression, farmers suffered like everyone else, but they rarely starved. Families with even small plots of land could still grow vegetables, raise dairy cattle, collect eggs, and weather the storm without cash. They could not afford luxuries, but they could survive. More recently, in Venezuela, many families that owned farmland continued producing essential crops, cassava, beans, rice, completely bypassing the failed currency. While urban landlords begged tenants for rent paid in devalued bolivars, farmers bartered directly and fed themselves. This is the value of calories. Urban real estate generates rent in collapsing currency. Agricultural land generates food, which always holds value. But as powerful as it is, agricultural land is not perfect. It carries risks most people do not talk about. First, it is illiquid. You cannot move it. Selling quickly under pressure is nearly impossible. If ownership becomes politically unsafe, the land becomes a trap. In Zimbabwe, the government seized thousands of commercial farms in 2000, almost overnight. Property titles were worthless. Farmers lost everything. Agricultural output dropped 60% within a decade. In just 1 year, total farming wealth fell by over 75%. Second, land is a target for heavy taxation, especially in a crisis. It is visible, it is stationary. Governments desperate for revenue know exactly where to look. And third, not all farmland is equal. The most resilient land supports export crops, which bring in stable foreign currency. If your harvest sells in collapsing local money, your real purchasing power can still fall. The bottom line? Farmland is not a trade, it is a life system. If treated correctly, agricultural land provides the one thing that matters most when everything else fails: independence. If knowing what survives is important, knowing what fails completely is essential. Throughout every documented collapse, one category consistently falls apart first: fixed income assets denominated in the collapsing currency. In Weimar Germany, bondholders were guaranteed repayment in marks. But when those marks lost 99.9% of their value, repayment meant nothing. Entire life savings were legally honored but practically wiped out. In Argentina, 2001, government restructuring stripped out 70% of bond value. Even reduced payments arrived years late and often in a different currency altogether. The problem is structural. Bonds are not backed by hard assets. They are claims against a government promise, a promise made in the very currency that is disintegrating. Next to fall, savings accounts in domestic banks. In Lebanon, the pound's collapse from 3,500 to 89,000 per dollar destroyed domestic purchasing power. Accounts still showed the same balances, but what it could actually buy had collapsed by 98%. You appeared rich, but you could not afford bread. These assets do not fail because of markets, they fail because of math. If your money is tied to a currency in freefall and stored in a system losing trust, it will not protect you. It will disappear before you can move it. Currencies do not fail without warning. They follow patterns, measurable, historical, and frighteningly predictable. We have seen it. Germany, Venezuela, Lebanon, Zimbabwe, Turkey. Different names, different governments, same collapse, same survivors. The real hedge is not any single asset. It is seeing the storm while the sky is still quiet. It is diversifying before you are forced to. It is holding gold not to get rich, but to hold ground. It is owning land not to profit, but to eat. It is storing skill, not just savings. History is not a riddle. It is a roadmap left by those who paid the price. The question is never if collapse is possible. The question is whether you will be positioned before the bakery writes 200 billion on bread again.